Microphone working? Yes. Okay. So welcome to Irreverent Storytelling. Hopefully you're in the right session. If not, you should stick around anyway. But what we have here today is a group of people who've experimented with some somewhat unorthodox ventures on social media and really actually just wanted to share our experiences in doing that with you. And the panel that we've got comes from a variety of different departments. So we have people from communications, people from publishing, people from digital media, social media, and I'm actually an educator. And we also come from a variety of different places, so Texas, Massachusetts, formerly Oregon, and different institution sizes, big museums, mid-sized museums, university-affiliated museums. And I've been quoted on Twitter already saying this once today, but what we're talking about is the ecosystem in which our museums and our collections exist. Medieval Reacts being one of my least favorites, Ugly Renaissance Babies being my actual favorite. But these are all things that are not made by museums, yet our content and our collections lives alongside of them. So this kind of topic, this irreverent storytelling with historic collections, is a conversation that's happening whether or not, how or not we engage with it. So that's really where our projects all sort of come together. And if you'd like to talk to us on this session, this is the hashtag we're using, We Did What. And with no further ado, I'll jump into our first panelist.
Hello, everybody. This is actually my first time ever presenting at a conference, so I'm really excited to talk about something awesome. Thank you. At last year's MCN, we had started our Snapchat 2 months prior to me attending MCN, and it was actually something I got asked about a lot. So I'm really excited to be able to talk to you guys about it a year in, sort of share our experience, tell you what it is if you don't know. I hope you do. Talk about what it is, how we use it, and sort of what the response has been, both anecdotal and in terms of analytics. If you want to follow along, you can tag me on Twitter, Alie Cline, and then I've got some actual examples of snaps that I put up last night from Mia, if you guys want to see those. So you can add me on Snapchat, and that's just Alie C. So why Snapchat? This is a platform that has gained tons of popularity in the last year or so, and it's not something I think people initially gravitate to when they think of social media. They think of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the big hitters. But Snapchat is one of the fastest growing platforms. It's now up to about 100 million daily active users, so that's a gigantic user base. And interestingly enough, 70% of the users are between 13 and 25, so it skews very, very young. And what's most interesting to me about it, working at a university art museum, the Blanton Museum of Art in Austin, Texas, is that around 77% of college students use Snapchat daily. So that's every day. They're opening Snapchat, they're looking at it, they're interacting with their friends on it. So we at the Blanton don't traditionally advertise to college students, even though we're actually located on a university campus. We are a little more focused on positioning the Blanton as sort of a gateway to the Austin community. So I was trying to figure out, as a social media manager, how do we connect with these college students? How can we bring them into the museum in a way that isn't forcing them to come with an art history class, right? So Snapchat seemed like an awesome place where we could sort of facilitate that interaction. And the way I sort of pitched it to my boss was that it fit in with our brand keywords. So on the right, our Blanton brand positions us as visual, unexpected, cool, and worldly. And these are all sort of things that tie into the platform. Unexpected is actually my favorite because one of the things I like most about Snapchat is you don't know what you're going to get when you send a snap to someone. It can be throughout the day, and when you're looking at stories on the Snapchat platform, you're never quite sure what's going to pop up. So I really like that aspect of it. So we launched in August of 2014, right after LACMA did. And so we both, it's a little friendly competition happening there. And we hit 500 followers 18 days after our launch, which for us is pretty explosive growth as a, on the smaller side art museum. The initial response was absolutely incredible. We got tons of snaps from people who loved what we were doing. Whoever runs this account is a genius is my personal favorite. And what we did, we actually, when we launched the platform, we only posted our Snapchat username in 2 places. We put it on Twitter and we put it on Instagram, and that was it. So getting 500 followers sort of organically in the first, less than 20 days was a really big achievement for us. These are some of the snaps that we'll send out. We have a pretty cohesive strategy for Snapchat, so the goal is always to be funny. That's always the goal. I'll wander around the galleries and try to think of, how can I give these paintings that were made 300, 400 years ago a 21st century voice? I think it's really important when you're looking at an artwork that you can connect with it. Again, this gets back to our keynote session of empathy. I think, sometimes we can feel so removed from what's actually in a painting. There's not a way to connect it to our daily lives. That speaking in this 21st century voice really helps not only young people, but older people as well, just sort of situate themselves within the gallery. And, we'll do things like song lyrics. We'll do pop culture references like to The Princess Bride, the Inigo Montoya thing. I just thought that was perfect with his doppelganger. And I'll just kind of wander around and see if I laugh at a caption that I'm writing, then I know, yes, this is going to go up. So I'll be walking around the galleries and the GAs are like, what are you doing? As I'm giggling to myself, sort of staring at my phone. But, we're trying to be very consistent with being funny, being relatable, talking a lot of times in sort of meme or online language, and really trying to appeal to a younger audience. So sometimes, I'll show my boss Snapchats and she doesn't get them, and that's okay. She understands that, she's not necessarily our audience here. We've had a great response actually on other platforms. So while Snapchat's very ephemeral and very private, you look at it just on your phone, you can screenshot snaps and put them up on other platforms. And this is where the majority of our growth has come from. So when people open our snaps, they'll screenshot them and then post them on their other networks to share with their followers. One of my favorites was this museum professional, Lindsay, and she said, the Blanton Museum Snapchats make me want to visit in case anyone still doubts the value of museums having fun on social media. So I think that kind of says it all. This woman doesn't live in Austin. She's probably not going to visit Austin, but if she does, she's going to come to the Blanton. So that's a really awesome thing. As we're moving forward with Snapchat, we're kind of branching out in terms of content. So when we first launched, I was really focused on making snaps that would appeal to a wide range of people. So I did a lot of Mean Girls quotes and references. I did like song lyrics. Now we're hitting our stride, so these are things that are not going up on our professional networks. They're very ephemeral. They will disappear. So we can kind of like have more fun with it, and I think that creates an authenticity that you don't really see with museum social media a lot. One of the challenges of Snapchat is that the term analytics is a little misnomer. There's really not a lot of analytics we can look at. You basically see how many people viewed your snap and how many people took a screenshot. So as of right now, we have a little under 1,500 followers and a roughly 40% open rate, which I'm super happy with because I don't know if you can point to 40% of your following, seeing your posts on Facebook or Twitter. So that's a really great stat for us. But a lot of sort of how I evaluate whether we did well or not is through anecdotal evidence. So again, people putting snaps on other platforms or sending us snaps saying, this is so funny, or I love you guys. So I think that you have to be okay with not having a ton of numbers to back stuff up sometimes. I think if you're feeling good about it and you are getting good reactions from people, that's something that you can focus on and use to your advantage. And I'll let our next speaker take the podium.
Oh, are we out of order?
Oh.
Okay, our other next speaker.
Hi, everybody. I'm Pam Martin. I am from the Albright Knox Art Gallery in Buffalo. Some of you may have heard me and my colleagues Steve Boyd and Kelly Carpenter talk about Art Madness last year, but I'm going to talk about it again this year and also add what we did for our second go-round this past March. So in 2014, the Albright Knox launched a social media campaign inspired by popular artworks in our collection and the NCAA March Madness brackets that everyone loves to fill out. We called it Art Madness. Each day of the campaign, we asked our online audiences to vote for their favorite artwork in that day's matchup. The victor moved on to the next level in the competition until the ultimate winner was crowned at the end of the tournament, and it was our Van Gogh, The Old Mill. We Whoa, Van Gogh hater in the house.
Home field advantage, I'm sorry.
We received a huge spike in social media engagement during the campaign. We had a lot of sort of responses on Twitter and Facebook. And much to our surprise, people were engaging in really in-depth discussions about the merits of one work or one style of art over another. This is just one Facebook thread that people were posting about a certain matchup. It was undoubtedly our most successful social media campaign to that point in terms of number of participants as well as the depth of engagement we were seeing. It was so successful that we decided to do it again in 2015. We thought using the same model with different artworks from our collection was probably a little bit redundant, so we decided to reach out to colleagues at other museums to see who might be up for a little friendly competition. To round out our Sweet 16, we enlisted 15 other museums from Hawaii to Canada, including the Blanton with Alie's help, and the Clark Art Institute with Vicky's help, and Ryan Dodge with the ROM back in the corner there. And thank you to thank you to everyone who participated. We posted each day's matchup on our Facebook and Twitter pages and asked the museums in that day's matchup to post or share on their platforms as well. We had hundreds of votes for each matchup. However, we did not see the discussion that occurred during the first campaign. We thought perhaps maybe this was because people weren't familiar with all the artworks in the competition. They were from museums around the country, so maybe they hadn't seen those artworks before. They didn't relate to them in the same way that they did when they were seeing all works that they were familiar with from our museum. Much of the social media engagement we observed was from participating museums. This was a great one from the Toledo Museum of Art, as well as just other museums. So it was actually a really great way to just sort of collaborate with other museums and, be part of that museum community. So the Honolulu Museum of Art did come very close to winning with Georgia O'Keeffe's Waterfall, but our director got pretty enthusiastic at the end and just emailed and called everyone he knew and asked them to vote for our Van Gogh while everyone in Hawaii was still asleep. So sorry about that. I had no control over that. That was not my fault. Lost my place. Okay, so Van Gogh was victorious again. Sorry, guys. All in all, we considered both campaigns a success. If the goal of the first Art Madness campaign was to engage, our local community and not only art lovers but sports lovers with art, that was sort of the goal of the first go-round. And then the goal of the second campaign was to introduce audiences from each of the communities surrounding the participating museums with artwork from other museums. So that's that.
Okay, so Museum Bowl. I'm Natalie Wiseman. I'm from the Seattle Art Museum. I'm a senior designer there that also works on a lot of social media content development, and I also manage the Instagram, so you should totally follow it. And
I'm Vicki Saltzman. I'm the Director of Communications at the Clark, so it was an East Coast, West Coast throwdown.
so when the Seahawks got into Super Bowl 49 earlier this year, we kind of were like, we have to do something. We have to participate. Obviously, sports are widely popular in the U.S., and people were going absolutely nuts in Seattle over the Seahawks. There were Seahawks donuts. There were Seahawks cocktails made out of Skittles. There were signs everywhere for Seahawks. So it was like, if we don't do this, it's a total missed opportunity. And actually, since the Seahawks were in the Super Bowl last year, we did do a wager with the Denver Art Museum. And when we won, we got to have this really cool Broncho Buster by Alexander Proctor. So as you can see, this was really great. We had, all these school kids come in, and they were really, really excited. So so let's see. Lost my notes. So how this kind of unfolded was we reached out to, first the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston.
Anybody here from MFA? They were chickens.
Yeah. They said, no, we don't want to do it. We were like,
Deflategate.
what? Yeah. They were so intimidated. So then we reached out to the Clark.
And we were much smaller, much more nimble. So we were like, sure, we'll play.
So we decided we waged our Albert Bierstadt Puget Sound on the Pacific Coast, which is a ginormous painting against.
We put down one of our Winslow Homers, a great one called Prout's Neck, which for you Mainers,
So you can see them here.
shows the
Detail.
East Coast, and we thought it was the perfect mate to this. Our director had a complete art historical approach, wherein you would have seen an awful painting that nobody would have cared about. But the Homer's one of our real treasures, so we didn't listen to him.
And additionally, the Bierstadt is much beloved by museum goers in Seattle.
So this came together super fast. Natalie's colleague, Cara Egan, reached out to me. I literally took the call on the subway in New York one day, and she's like, would you do this? And I was like, okay. So the two curators from Seattle and our curator, Richard Rand, were the ones who really sort of instigated this. And so within the course of a week, we put together a press release to announce that we were doing it, announced a throwdown that we would take place on Twitter the very next day, and it took off like a lightning bolt. It was pretty crazy. Then the next thing we knew, Friday morning, I was laying in bed, and NPR came on that morning with Morning Edition, and they were like, Seattle versus the Clark Art Institute. And I was like, what? And our PR firm called me, and they were like, that's $700,000 worth of free advertising you just got. And I was like, okay, I'll take it. So anyway, the first big hit of it was our Twitter Throwdown, which was a lot of fun, and people from across the country really got into it. Those MFA chickens even participated and put some pictures in to show their colors. And then, as you can see, some of the other sort of great numbers that we racked up in terms of tweets and things like that. If you want to go ahead and advance one. Tons of press coverage for it. Amazing free media for both of our institutions across the nation. Go ahead. And then we just started having a lot of fun using our collection to be amusing to ourselves, if no one else.
Yeah, we were all just like, we're so funny and laughing.
We had the best time. We really didn't care about the rest of the nation, but we had a really great time. So this was sort of the lead in, and then we got to Super Bowl Sunday, and I was telling Natalie, I woke up that morning, I was like, I should be prepared for this. So I threw together, some of these little pieces to throw out no matter what was happening. And we just, the traction just built all day, and then I was watching the Super Bowl with our curator and our head of exhibitions, and I think the truth is neither of us expected to lose, for starters.
Well, we didn't expect to lose because we betted this like ginormous painting, and we were like, oh, it'll be fine, we won't have to ship that across the country.
That was the bet, is whoever lost had to ship it for a 3-month loan. So if you remember, the end of the Super Bowl was a little scary, especially if you were sitting in New England. And just before Malcolm Butler saved us, our head curator turned to the exhibitions coordinator and said, how much is it going to cost to crate and ship that? And she's like, $50,000. He's like, shit. So, but we had fun. You can see these are some of the great posts that Sam put up. And one of these, you see they're measuring the wall to hang our home.
And we both had that great idea, so they also
did a post. We just happened to have a gallery under construction, so we did a little video with one of our curators who was measuring for the Sam piece, because it was way bigger than ours.
And this is our director, and I made her. She did not want to do this, but I made her do
it.
it.
My director yelled at me because she did this picture, and my post back was nice poncho. And he told me that was disrespectful to the director.
So yeah, we got lots of great feedback. This is a cool comment that we got. Okay, whoever does social media for MFA Boston, the Clark, and I Heart Sam wins this week. And they were a Patriots fan, so. And then, yeah, we got, besides getting all that press coverage, we got so much social media coverage.
Yeah, so Sebastian Smee, the art critic at the Boston Globe, an Australian no less, who has no interest in football, thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. So he tweeted all weekend for us. And we won. So no, Ruth Bader Ginsburg didn't come to see the Bierstadt. That's her looking at our Homer. But that was one of them. One of our moments far in. Seattle threw down a picture of a celebrity in their gallery, so we threw down the notorious RBG. So we figured we won that. So that's our curator, Richard Rand. You can see the very expensive effort we went to open the galleries that day with blue gaffer's tape on the Patriots flag. We went to a lot of effort. But we had about 250 people show up when we finally opened. From the time we won the Super Bowl to the time we actually opened, which was in April, we fielded anywhere from 20 to 50 calls a day from people saying, when is that Super Bowl picture coming? When is the Super Bowl picture? The Associated Press called us every Monday morning to make sure they hadn't missed it. I mean, people were interested. So here we are at the opening of the gallery with their beautiful Bierstadt taking up the whole wall in our gallery.
It's really big.
Thrilled. It's a massive painting.
It's so expensive.
More than $50,000. So you can go one more. So this is actually, Williamstown, Massachusetts is a town of 5,000 people in the very northwest corner of Massachusetts. Just so happens this guy is the head orthopedist in town and a big Seahawks fan and one of our major donors. So he actually wrote us a check afterwards because he said he thought we were so fun that he felt like he should give us more money. So did it work? Yeah.
Okay.
That's our story.
I feel a little silly for putting myself after them because actually I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time, and watching Museum Bowl go down in Seahawks territory, being a Pats fan, was amazing. So the project that I'm going to talk to you about, which I'll reveal in a minute because I like a little bit of drama, really came out of an exhibition, and it came out of a specific need. So this is Italian-style fashion since 1945, which is a traveling exhibition by the Victoria and Albert that visited the Portland Art Museum in Oregon, which is where I worked at the time. Now I work at the Portland Museum of Art in Maine. Just going to let that one sink in. But it's an amazing exhibition in terms of the fact it's a huge number of objects. They even shipped us a Vespa. And, I mean, it's got everything from ball gowns to bikinis. It's got Armani. It's got Versace. If you love this stuff, it was an easy sell, and we had lines around the block. If you don't love this, it reinforced everything that we didn't want people to think about the museum that we had a problem with. We've really done a major campaign recently to think of ourselves not only as a museum in Portland, but a museum of Portland, a museum that's representative of everyone who lives in that city of various classes, and the museum's been really working to make itself feel inclusive. And then you look at these promotional images, and they don't feel inclusive if you're looking at them in that way. So that was the real initiative that our education department walked in with, was how do we make the bridge to this exhibition? So this is the project, Museum Makeover, and I will say it was only one of the initiatives that we tried, but this is the one that was social media related and irreverent. But as you can see, it's images from our collection that have been photoshopped to wear slightly new clothing. And if this looks a little familiar, it should. Léo Caillard is a French photographer who went viral a couple years ago on BuzzFeed, The Guardian. Everybody was talking about him because he was redressing sculptures from the Louvre in hipster clothing. And there was something about these images that everyone was talking about. He actually spiked twice. People found them and then refound them and still thought they were funny. So we actually reached out to him and asked for his permission to say, can we do this? We want to do this. So our goals were really sort of threefold. The first one was to really articulate why the exhibition connected it's ringing, why the exhibition connected to Portland. The story of the exhibition is looking at Italy after 1945, after World War II, and what basically happened in Italy was a rebranding campaign. They had very little money and really needed to rebuild, so they set about establishing themselves as this center of artisan and craft work, as this place that you thought of in terms of like Roman Holiday and Audrey Hepburn, and as, really clothing that had a sense of place identified with it. Made in Italy meant something. And then you look at Portland, Oregon, and you say, well, we've got a lot of small hipster artists who like putting birds on things. And we've got a lot of pop culture media telling us who we are. Hello, Portlandia. And we also have this really strong sense of place in movements like Keep Portland Weird. It's something that actually really does relate to this community. We just need to articulate why. The second part was actually articulating why it was at the Portland Art Museum. We do not have a fashion collection. We do not have a design collection. Why are we showing a bunch of design objects from the Victoria and Albert Museum? So what we were trying to do is articulate these connections that almost, not all, because we've got a lot of nudes, almost all of the pieces in our collection are wearing clothes. There is this idea of fashion that goes across the Encyclopedic Museum, and we can draw out those connections. So for people who are coming to see the Armani, why do they also maybe want to go check out our European galleries? And for those people who aren't and who are still questioning why this exhibition is here, let's show them why it connects to a variety of collection areas that we have. And then the last one was kind of a broad goal for our education department, which was really to co-create with visitors, to place their voices, their images, their words on par with our institutional content. And this is a process that we really gave the visitors as much agency as we could. They picked which piece they wanted to reiterate or to remix. They put their clothes on it, things that are really identity driven. I mean, we communicate a lot about who we are through what we wear. And also, as I said, their words. So I was literally just walking through the galleries looking for people whose clothing looked like it told an interesting story. And then I would set them up with a photographer and interview them. And these are things that I got from random visitors in our galleries. There was a lovely man who said, even going through the exhibits, my wife, she feels sorry for me. There's not much there for men. I actually like glitter and rhinestones and all that stuff. If they ever open the door for that in men's fashion, I would be all for it. He was pretty fabulously dressed. The other one I wanted to point out was this, it's in the lower right corner. I think a lot about what is going to make an emotional statement, not an aesthetic statement. I want someone to feel what I'm wearing emotionally. That came from a 15-year-old who was at an LGBTQ event we ran, and I decided to do a makeover with, I think it was 20-something of them. I didn't really think it through beforehand. Remixing a Daumier print. So they took a Daumier print of all of these judges and put their clothes on it. And for them, putting their clothes as LGBTQ teens, as people who felt alienated, on top of a bunch of legislature, rich white men, felt really empowering. They got really into it. And this was the sort of content that was going up on our social media social media feeds as a part of what our institutional messaging was. And that was really exciting for us. So this is what they looked like put together. This girl works in a small jewelry shop, sells some other things too. I ended up going to her shop's new opening because, we had this 20-minute experience where we were working together and you made these connections. But as you can see, they were remarkably popular. I'm not a numbers person, so I'm cheating on this one. So numbers are the way that we tend to many of our departments define success. So we can define success in this as saying, we had 19,500 people look at our most popular version of this post. We had, of those, 3,000 interacted with it. 560 of them commented, shared, or liked it. And just to give you sort of a reference for that, that is 5 to 6 times more than our average Italian style post, which were already 2 to 3 times more than our average post. It beat out our next most popular posts in our institutional history by 7,000 to the next one and 14,000 to the one after that. I mean, these were really things that we hadn't seen before. So we know that it works that way. But that's actually not how I tended to define success because I'm an educator. What really appealed to me was the part where people engaged in comments that were talking about the issues that we identified. That idea of, as we said, Portland as craft, Portland as place, Portland in the media. And we saw in the comments that people were making on Instagram and on Facebook, them engaging with these concepts. I'm going to read these verbatim. Great job on the Portland style, but where are the keens? Somebody had to explain to me what keens are. They're a pair of shoes. Pretty sure I've seen the girl on the right working in the local Portland vintage shop. And words of wisdom. Love the fact that other people realize that fashion doesn't have to be wearable or practical. They were having conversations with other visitors' statements around exactly the issues that we were looking for them to highlight on this exhibition. And we also started making these connections with local businesses. As I said, she works at a small jewelry shop. We actually tagged all of the artists who made all of her jewelry. She knows every single one of them. And so suddenly they felt like their art, their creations were on the museum's media feed, that we cared enough to pay attention to them. And then, we had a dressmaker who was like, I want to participate. And she came up with a dress that matched this painting that she had a relationship with. We had this amazing community engagement moment. And I think for me, the biggest success was that kind of conversation that started happening. I mean, from our docents to our event staff to one museum staff member whose mother called her every week to talk about the latest makeover, people were talking about this. And that was really exciting for us to have people talking about pedagogically sound issues. For the people who participated, it was a kind of incredible experience. You had 20 minutes with an educator spending time close looking at a work of art. And a lot of the things that they were doing in terms of adopting those poses, that's kinesthetic learning. And we have participants from that 14-year-old, who I didn't put up because she's a minor, to our 62-year-old man who was very game to get into that pose. And that was great to see that diversity represented as well. But the most exciting piece for me was actually this one, which is, it's a Renoir sculpture that, most people have walked past every day. But the woman who was interviewed, who, chose this piece herself, she said, I just walked past her in the galleries and I was like, this is me. My body is like hers. She's sort of an exhibitionist and she likes food. And that related to people. And it related to people in the ways we didn't expect. I had a number of people come up to me and talk about it. We saw it on the Facebook feed, which I'll let you guys read on your own time. But I think the most exciting part was a docent who said, I walk past that every day. And I look at her body and I think her body is beautiful. And then I saw her in those clothes and I was like, she looks like me, but I don't think that I'm beautiful. And it was this amazing body positivity moment that I was like, I could never have expected that. And that totally came out of the visitor audience and having these visitor conversations that, we let that happen accidentally in a certain way. But I think that was what really made this project successful for me, was that moment. And incidentally, that's the one that reached 19,500 people. So what we're going to do now is kind of jump into, shouldn't have advanced that fast, a small panel discussion where we've identified a couple of questions that we think are interesting that have come up in all of our work. And then we'll turn it over to you if you guys have specific questions or experiences. This is something where I think a lot of people have experimented with it, and we'd love to hear from you as well. So our first question is this. Can fulfilling educational missions coexist with simply trying to go viral? Is it okay to just have fun with your collection? Who wants to take that one?
Well, is this working? If you'll, none of them are working.
That one's on.
Okay.
Pass it down. I'll play tech.
Okay, if you'll advance one slide. Oh, it's not there. Oh,
Nope.
for some reason she's not living there. Well, there should be a picture of the little dancer, age 14, by Edgar Degas, wearing her Patriots helmet. And I can't tell you how many people on our Facebook post took us to task. And it's like, we really didn't put the helmet on her. We photoshopped it. But we had people saying, take that off of her immediately. You're going to damage the sculpture. And how can you do that to Edgar Degas? So he was not rolling in his grave. And we actually posted back and said, relax, just have a little fun. So I think it depends on your audience. Some people who love the Clark are not people with senses of humor, obviously, or who just feel that art shouldn't be transcending its own barriers. But from the curatorial standpoint, they felt like this was the greatest outpouring of interest in coming to see one painting in our museum in probably ever. So yeah, we think it's fine to have a little fun because it brought different people into the museum and it gave people an access point to art who are not normally art aficionados or art, goers, if you will. So.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on that because, I mean, one of the things that we thought about, this one's so squeaky. One of the things that we thought about was really that question of, to understand most of our labels, you need this entire art historical narrative. To understand something like Museum Bowl, you need an entirely different lexicon. And validating that in visitors is great. I mean, why not? I mean, it's the same process that we want them to do. It's close looking, it's visual analysis. That's great for us. That totally works from an educational standpoint.
And I just want to follow up on that too. I think the question I get most often with Snapchat is, have you ever gotten in trouble for this? And the answer is no. I've actually never had anyone say anything about it being disrespectful. And I think that's part of playing to your key audience. So I'm not sending these to museum directors. I'm not sending these to 50, 60-year-old people. I'm sending these to college students. It's a very targeted demographic, and that's a really strategic thing that we're doing. So by knowing your audience and knowing who you're trying to target with these sort of irreverent missions, I guess, that can help allay a lot of these sort of institutional fears about, well, you're disrespecting the art, but for the people you're serving, they're not seeing it that way.
We did get in trouble, though. We forgot to tell our trustees that we were wagering one of our best paintings. we did it fast. So it just turns out we're in the same town as Williams College. Our chairman of the board has 3 kids all at Williams College who all follow us on Instagram. And his daughter was like, "Hey, Dad, this is so cool what you're doing." And he said, "What?" "What?" And then I got a call, and he's pretty stern. And he's from Norway. "Wiki? What did you do?" So I said, "Well, it wasn't me, it was the curators, really, so let me let you connect them." But yeah, that would be the one thing we learned is you can have fun, but you have to tell people who make big decisions. So luckily we didn't lose.
All right. I'm just going to read the question because I'm an access person. So, are these kind of ventures useful in creative forms of engagement, or are they distracting or even disrespectful to the artworks and the artists who created them?
And if anyone else wants to answer.
Yeah.
You've got your stuff up now. Click again.
Yeah.
I think you're the second one.
Okay, so the first year that we did Museum Bowl, we did have an issue, and it was, we originally wagered this raven headdress, which is part of we have a pretty big Northwest Coast native collection, and it's kind of one of the most amazing collections that we have, and our curator really wanted to connect this to the Seahawks logo, because that is inspired by Haida design and Formline design, but also, we wanted to represent our collection in that way, and we actually completely offended the Newhawk Nation in BC. So we apologized, and we took it back, and we ended up betting something else. But fortunately, they were pretty receptive of that, and they appreciated it, and we actually kind of established a relationship with them because of that. So we took the mask up to Bella Coola, to the reservation there, and they actually had like a big potlatch for it. And so the coolest part is they had a couple like master carvers there who like took photos of everything, and then they made a replica of it. So we have actually like talked to them about like repatriating that object, but that's a very complicated process. So in this meantime, at least we have this connection with them, and although it was kind of heartbreaking that we did what we did, I think it kind of turned out okay because we kind of made a connection with them. So.
As the other person who goofed, I mean, I think that this was really a moment. I mean, this is one of the first things that we started talking about was when we're using these collections, there are things that we can't see. And if you can't see it, then you can't avoid it. And that's a really strong risk. So In our museum makeover project, we're transferring images of people that have a lot of signifiers and also are a lot larger than the image they end up appearing on Instagram and Twitter. So we had a gentleman who came in, and he's wearing like an Australian hat and a big like sheepskin fur vest thing. I mean, it's the most Pacific Northwest thing you've ever seen. And he wanted to be photoshopped onto an Olmec sculpture who was sitting cross-legged. And when you reduce that image down to this size, I don't know how many people in this room are going to see it, but we put it up on Twitter. Our entire education department looked at it, saw it while it was being made, and someone almost instantly pointed out to us that it looked like we had dressed up as they perceived a Mexican sculpture, Olmec not being Mexican, but that's our perception, a Mexican sculpture in Mexican farm workers' clothes. And we pulled it immediately. We're like, okay, yeah, that looks bad. We'd all looked at it, none of us had seen it. And that was a real moment where we're like, okay, let's have this conversation, because how did we not see this? And the immediate reaction that we had was, okay, now you're only going to use the European collections and the American collections. And then it was, well, this is the second week. What's it going to look like if we now only represent ourselves as images of white people for the rest of this 19-part series? That's also going to look really bad. So how do we balance knowing that we're stepping on fraught territory when we engage with cultures that we're not representing, that we probably will not see things, while also realizing that if we don't represent them and we don't engage with these collections and we exclude them, then we're excluding them from the representations we're providing to the public. And we just sort of found ourselves in this really hairy water. And actually, it was interesting because it made us rethink where we were coming from, and it made us really look at some challenging things in the way that we were doing things. And I thought that that was actually useful. I mean, I am so sorry that we offended somebody. Absolutely. I felt really, really bad and stupid. But feeling stupid is sometimes a useful thing where you're like, okay, let's rethink. So it was bad but useful, I think, which is the same thing that Seattle said. It gives you an opportunity to figure out, okay, well, what did we do and why and how did we not see this? Does anyone want to jump in on the lighter part? All right, so moving on to our next question. Does our digital presence match the in-gallery experience, or is it a bait and switch for the visitors?
So this is something we're thinking about a lot right now at the Blanton, mostly because we don't have public Wi-Fi, and we also have no cell service in our galleries. So when someone walks in there with a cell phone and they're trying to interact with us, they're pretty cut off right now. So if we're sending out these snapshots to people and it's sort of inspiring them to, as they have, send us snaps back. A lot of times I'll get snaps from people from art history textbooks with captions written on them. And in one instance, I was actually at the Blanton creating Snapchats, and I got a Snapchat from someone who was also at the Blanton making a Snapchat. So that was like this awesome in real life and online sort of convergence, which was great. But if we don't make that experience available to the vast majority of our visitors, what's the use of creating all this goodwill through our online efforts and then having people come in and not being able to connect to Wi-Fi or not being able to have cell service and send out a Snapchat while they're there? It's just, I think we need to think a little more strategically about, we can do all this amazing outreach online. We can be funny, we can be personable and empathetic and relatable, but the second you step in the gallery and that changes, then everything you've done to build the visitor experience to that point sort of goes away.
Yeah, I would say I think a lot of what all of us are trying to do is sort of break down the barriers and make people feel like it's not scary to come into an art museum, and really the art museum experience is for everyone, and you can find your own way and make your own experience. But when you have these really engaging campaigns online and you come in and it's still a very quiet place where maybe you do still feel a little uncomfortable, I think what we're doing online is not necessarily matching the experience that most people will still have in the physical space. So I think there's a long way to go with how we represent ourselves in those two different spaces.
I think that there's an opportunity to encourage people to share on social media when you're being kind of loose and casual and you're being irreverent, but you don't necessarily, you can come engage with the art, and it doesn't have to be like a serious, like, I have to go learn and look. You can just enjoy and you can share with others and share with your friends and family. So I think that that can kind of help in this way.
And I think that's what our visitors do a lot anyway. They caption that art all the time as they walk through. Right now we have a drawing up that we have never shown, and it's of the mighty Hercules. And he looks very mighty, except for one central part of his anatomy, which is mighty small. And I stood in the gallery the other day, and at least 20 women had the exact same observation. Like, look at that! So they're saying it anyway, and it just lets them know that we're, not as smart as we think we are all the time. Sometimes we can be just as dumb. And actually, we had our head curator at the time literally is the kind of guy who walks into the Prado and says to me, look at the rack on that one. So they think things too. It's all fun. And if it gets people into museums for whatever reason, I think it's a win. And then maybe they'll be accidentally educated about it in different ways. So is it a bait and switch? Maybe. Is that terrible? Maybe not.
I think that's a great point. We had new Stunnin, who was regularly featured on Ugly Renaissance Babies, and people would walk into that gallery, go straight to him, and walk out. They knew it was there. They came there just to see him. So it is a behavior we're already seeing in the galleries. The thing that we really noticed was actually, though, the internal change. I mean, having these images that were part of the museum makeover project, they actually ended up being handed off to the docents, who used them to teach in the galleries. So they would put them on the iPad, and then they had exercises where, they give kids paper and ask them to draw their own version. If you could reclothe this sculpture, this painting, what would you do? So seeing those efforts, it can bleed over, especially I think when, as we've seen, we're all proving metrics of success. And so proving success can kind of crack that door open where it's like, okay, Irreverence worked here, where else could it work? Maybe this is, that test case. What we'd like to do is actually open it up to see if any of you have any questions. I'm going to be a microphone runner as well as a panelist.
What about living artists and making commentary on artists that are around?
Okay, so living artists and commentary therein. Anybody?
We only have dead artists in our
Okay.
Well, I could maybe take that. So the first time we did Art Madness, we used really a mix of things from our collection, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but we probably had some works by living artists. And you have to think about rights, obviously, what you have the rights to use and put out there. But we probably were more on the side of playing it safe in what we did, because we didn't overprint on images or anything like that. We tend to be pretty strict about that. So I think you really just have to adapt the delivery based on the artworks that you're working with. But that's not to say you can't have fun with it. You just have to, work within some parameters, maybe.
I would also say, when in doubt, just check. Just make sure before you do it.
Yeah, we used one contemporary piece and only one because of rights issues, and it was one that we had a non-exclusive license to, so we'd already been given permission to do that with. Ironically, that was one that was censored on Instagram because apparently it was too realistic, a male nude, which launched a very interesting conversation about contemporary art and critiques. And so in some ways I think, if you can use those works that are contemporary, you're opening yourself up to a larger collection. And you guys used an Oldenburg sculpture in one of your riffs, didn't you? That was great.
I believe that also had an NEL.
Yeah, so they had an inflatable by Oldenburg that deflated for Deflategate. It's really funny.
I'm just sort of monitoring our Twitter feed right now with the hashtag, and Coven had a really great question. Why is Irreverence okay online, thousands of visitors, but makes us uncomfortable on site for hundreds of visitors? I think that's a really interesting question. And I just wanted to sort of open it up to you guys to see if you...
Isn't that what Museum Hack is all about now, though? I mean, essentially, they're taking I think Museum Hack is taking a little bit of our own market away from us because they're not afraid to go in and be irreverent, whereas we still probably all treat our works like we're in a temple of art, and our building's actually shaped like a temple. So I don't know. I think this is part of the evolving cultural acceptance of looking at art in ways other than the way that you're told to look at it, and that's a big switch.
Their mic.
So I'm Alex. I'm from MIA. Hope you all visited last night. Had a good time. So we do a program called Newsflash, which some may have been up in the galleries. You see them, and they're a little bit of kind of a social media approach, instantiated physically in the gallery space themselves. So it's kind of commentary about current affairs through the prism of the collection, and they tend to be on the irreverent side, and I think we get a bit of a pass because they all have a byline. So it's a individual staff voice. It's not the voice of the institution to the extent that unsigned commentary would be. That said, we do get a lot of comments, a lot of complaints, and people do tear them down and rip them up at times. So, which actually, is engagement, right? So I think it's been a successful program from that perspective.
I think that's great to hear because, how do you define success and for who? There aren't projects that really work for everybody. There are very few projects that work for everybody. And so when we're looking at trends and we're looking at audiences, and I think most of us defined, your audience is college students. My audience was the people who weren't already sold on Italian style. And that makes it easier, I think, especially when you're talking to people and you're defending what these projects are and what they're doing, is to really have those specific deliverables, because then you can say, this is how I know I met that. And if engagement is ripping up a piece of paper in a gallery, that should be in the deliverable. That'd be great. Other questions?
I sort of wanted to get back to the Mia thing because I don't know if you saw on Twitter last night, there was sort of some debate among people at MCN over whether that was the best use of sort of gallery wall space or not. And I saw it and I just thought it was awesome right off the bat because I loved how it was, and I think Coven pulled this out too, like taped up with blue tape, and it looked very sort of guerrilla-esque almost. And right now at the Blanton, we're really looking at wall labels and sort of how we're writing them and how we're presenting them. But it is interesting that it makes people uncomfortable that these sort of museum-sanctioned, almost storied, I guess, things that have a lot of history attached to them, like wall labels are always curator-written, they have a lot of history, and then you have programs like Museum Hack where they really don't have that sort of same baggage that museums do. And I think we can so often get bogged down in that, well, this is how it's always been done, we can't offend anybody, we can't sort of branch out. And I think if we're more willing to just try it, just try things and see if they work or not, we can get so much more accomplished. Because if we're always very internally scared to do things, then you're never going to do anything. And I'm sort of in the position of asking forgiveness and not permission. I would almost always rather go with that than ask permission and get shot down every single time because we're too scared to actually do anything.
I think it's great that you guys are going against this whole stereotype that's been around for so many years, that museums are just these stodgy places that are quiet, don't touch, don't talk, don't do anything. And you guys are willing to go out on a limb. And even if you piss some people off, art is about creating an emotional response in people. So if you piss some people off, but they're coming down to the museum, they're interacting and talking about why that makes them angry and why this is wrong or whatever, as long as you can kind of keep it in line, I think that's generating interest, it's generating, engagement between, and it's making visitors experience things together as opposed to just coming in and, taking a look at it.
Yeah, and I think it's part of the whole evolution of museums right now. A couple of years ago, while our galleries were under construction, we did a virtual gallery and asked people to mount their own exhibition using our works and hang it the way they wanted to. And our curator got called to task by many other curators because they were like, we are the ones who curate exhibitions, not people. You can't let people do it. And then we had the audacity to hang a couple of them because we thought it would be fun, and we were in a flexible mode at that point. And our first curator was actually a 12-year-old girl, which I thought was great. I put her on billboards. She was everywhere. But our curator really took a beating from his curatorial colleagues who felt that he was undermining the importance of art historical research and a curatorial perspective. And then the Wall Street Journal called us out on it too, so whatever.
You saying billboards actually brings up something that we're just about to experiment with at the Blanton is I fall under PR and marketing is where the social media position lives, and our director tasked us with being more witty with our advertising. And this makes me so nervous, but in the spring we're gonna run billboards with Snapchat captions on them.
That's awesome.
So
me and my boss saw things a little differently at first because she, for dropping 30 grand on billboards, like everyone needs to get them. It can't be this sort of hyper-focused millennial sort of approach. And we went back and forth, for a month over what are these captions going to look like, and I was really trying to fight for, we have to go all in. We can't play this safe and have it come off as sort of watered down and weak. You either have to really commit to this and realize that people are not going to get it. Some people are not going to get it, but some people will. And even the people who don't get it are still seeing this really interesting combination of text and language and voice and paintings, and that can still be just as impactful as, a millennial understanding like squad goals. It doesn't necessarily, the two don't have to be mutually exclusive. So if you're in the Austin area in April, keep an eye out for those. But we finally got to a point where she felt comfortable and the director felt comfortable with branching out a little bit and not being super safe with sort of a very normally safe ad buy. So I think we're really excited to see how that works out and see the reaction from the public.
One of the things that was most interesting to us, because we were definitely worried that people were going to think of this as, disrespecting our collections. And we had only one guy who very respectfully said, I disagree with this. I think you should not be doing this to these sculptures. And I think there was one that I actually responded to, and I was like, these are our learning goals. This is why we're doing it. Laid it out there because it was very nice that I had a boss and a mentor at that time who was very big on making you actually write those out in advance. So having them ready to go, I was like, that's an amazing lesson to know. But one of the nice things was that really other users came to have that conversation, that it really didn't have to be a conversation that we were having. So people could talk about whether this was disrespectful. And we had a similar one to the Degas girl in a helmet where actually with the image I showed you of the woman in green, people were like, how did they get the left sleeve on? Yeah. And then a bunch of other people answered and they're like, it's called Photoshop. And the original user deleted their comment. So there were just a bunch of people being like, it's called Photoshop. But it was nice actually to see, again, that visitor voice validating it, that we as the institution didn't need to answer that, but through close looking and bringing in your prior information, you as a community can actually have that conversation. And it almost always came out in support of the museum and the project, which was cool.
That sort of brings up an interesting point that for a while it was museums are talking at people, right? And then we want to have this dialogue with our audience. But there's also now this sort of thing happening where people are just talking to each other about maybe what they see. So the museum isn't necessarily always in the conversation. Maybe they're providing like the focal point of the conversation. But that's happening a lot on Facebook too for us, or it did around Art Madness and some other things where people would just be going back and forth and we'd be like, oh, do we need to jump in? And we never did because people were sort of policing themselves and just having the conversation amongst themselves. So I think that's really great that museums can sort of foster that conversation among other people.
We shouldn't have sat at the other side of the table. And the other thing is, as we started this presentation, these are already conversations that are happening online with Twitter accounts and Instagram accounts who are taking tons of pictures of Renaissance babies and putting them on the internet, which is great, because it gets people curious about Renaissance babies. But what they're not doing is including links back to the collections that will tell them why is that monk doing something very strange in the marginalia, or where did this come from, or even what the date is. They just have the captions and then no resource back. And so if museums, this is my perspective, but if museums aren't a part of that dialogue, then we're not saying this is a place that you can come to actually get that answer. And we are actually the places who have those answers and who can take that initial spark that makes you curious about medieval marginalia and turn that into, okay, let's actually get into what's really fascinating about it and why and how and who. And we're the repository of those stories, and if we're not in that conversation, then nobody knows to come ask us.
I think we're just about out of time.
You're a better timekeeper than I am. Perfect. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. If you have more questions, we're available. We're interested in talking about this, so please do reach out, and thank you for your questions.